Most men believe attraction ends when she says it's over. It doesn't. It ended earlier, quietly, invisibly, in a moment he never registered as significant. The timeline only looks sudden because he wasn't watching the right thing. There's a specific instant when emotional investment stops accumulating and starts withdrawing. It doesn't announce itself. There's no conversation. The shift happens internally, and by the time behavior changes enough to be noticed, the internal decision is already complete. Men usually interpret this backward. They see the distance, the coldness, the withdrawal, and they think these are the problem. They're not. These are the aftermath. What looks like the beginning is actually the end stage. Here's what makes this difficult to track. The moment itself is boring. It's not dramatic. It's not a fight. It's not a betrayal. It's usually something small, something that, in isolation, seems completely irrelevant. But context isn't built in isolation. Every interaction carries the weight of every interaction before it. And at some point, one unremarkable moment becomes the moment where accumulated disappointment crosses a threshold. Not consciously, not deliberately, but it crosses. And once it crosses, the internal evaluation shifts from "I'm assessing this" to "I've already assessed this." Men miss this because they're focused on what's being said, but the collapse happens in what's not being said. It happens in the small hesitations, the fractional delays before responding, the slight shift in how questions are answered. None of these things mean anything on their own, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern reflects something that's already happened internally. Let me be specific about what this looks like. A man does something he's done many times before, something that previously produced warmth, maybe even gratitude. This time, it produces nothing. Or worse, it produces subtle irritation. He notices the change in reaction, but he doesn't understand what it means. So he tries harder. He repeats the behavior, thinking maybe she didn't notice. Maybe she was distracted. Maybe if he does it again, better this time, the response will return to what it was. It won't. Because what he's trying to restore is emotional availability, and emotional availability isn't negotiated through effort. It's either present or it's not. And if it's not, effort doesn't reactivate it. Effort highlights its absence. This is where men usually double down. They interpret the distance as a problem that needs solving. So they solve, they adjust, they communicate, they ask what's wrong. And often, she'll say nothing's wrong. Because nothing is wrong, in the sense that nothing new has happened. The change isn't external, it's internal. And internal changes don't require external explanations. But here's what makes this especially disorienting. She doesn't always know it happened either. Not consciously. Not in a way she could articulate if asked. The shift isn't a decision in the traditional sense. It's more like a recalibration, a background process that adjusts how future interactions will be interpreted. And once that recalibration happens, the same behaviors that previously generated closeness now generate distance. Not because the behaviors changed, because the lens changed. Think of it this way. There's a period where behavior is still being evaluated, where actions still carry the potential to shift perception, where responsiveness is still calibrated to what's happening in real time. Then there's a period after, where actions are no longer evaluated individually, they're filtered through a conclusion that's already formed, where responsiveness isn't calibrated to what's happening now, but to what's already been decided about what will happen. The transition between these two periods is the collapse point, and it's almost always invisible when it occurs. Men usually become aware of this when inconsistency appears. She's warm one day, cold the next, engaged in the morning, withdrawn by evening, responsive to certain topics, unreachable on others. This looks random. It's not. What's actually happening is that she's navigating the gap between what she feels and what she thinks she should feel, or between what she felt recently and what she feels now. The inconsistency isn't confusion, it's transition. She's not deciding whether to stay or leave. She's adjusting to a decision that's already been made, one she may not even recognize as a decision yet. During this phase, men often experience something extremely confusing. She still participates, she still responds, she's still physically present, but something fundamental is missing. It's not anger. Anger would be easier to address. It's not sadness. Sadness would indicate emotional investment. It's something closer to neutrality, to detachment, and detachment is the hardest state to reverse because it doesn't oppose connection. It's simply stopped expecting it. Here's what detachment actually looks like in practice. Questions get answered, but not expanded on. Plans get made, but without enthusiasm. Conversations happen, but they don't go anywhere. Everything functions on the surface, but the energy that used to animate those functions has been rerouted elsewhere. Not to someone else necessarily, just elsewhere, away. Men often misread this phase as temporary, as a mood, as stress from work or family or something external that will eventually pass. And sometimes she'll even frame it that way herself, not dishonestly, but because she's also trying to make sense of something that doesn't have clear language attached to it. But what feels like a mood is actually a shift in baseline. What looks like temporary distance is permanent recalibration presenting itself gradually. The problem is that gradual presentation makes it easy to normalize, to accommodate, to wait out, and waiting is exactly what allows the shift to solidify without resistance. Now, here's the part that usually frustrates men the most. This entire process can happen without a single definable mistake. There's no catastrophic failure, no betrayal, no obvious misstep, just a slow accumulation of moments where expectation and reality didn't align. And at some point, expectation stopped adjusting to reality and instead started withdrawing from it. Men search for the turning point. They replay conversations, they analyze behavior, they try to pinpoint the exact moment everything changed, but there is no exact moment. There's a gradient, and by the time the gradient is steep enough to be noticeable, it's already been sloping for a while. So why does this happen without warning? Because warning requires belief that something can still be influenced. And by the time the shift occurs, the belief that influence is possible has already eroded. Not all at once, gradually, across dozens of micro interactions that individually seemed fine. This is why conversations about what's wrong often feel circular. She says nothing's wrong because nothing catastrophic happened. He insists something must be wrong because the emotional temperature changed. Both are correct. Both are incomplete. What changed wasn't an event. What changed was the framework through which events are interpreted, and frameworks don't reset just because someone wants them to. Men often describe this phase as walking on eggshells, as trying to read signals that keep shifting, as never quite knowing where they stand. That description is accurate. But it's not describing her behavior, it's describing his position. He's trying to navigate a relational space that no longer includes him the way it used to. And the harder he tries to reestablish the old position, the more obvious it becomes that the old position no longer exists. Here's what happens next. Effort becomes pressure. Attention becomes surveillance. Care becomes neediness. Not because any of those things changed in substance, but because the emotional context that made them legible as positive has dissolved. What was once attentiveness now feels like monitoring. What was once devotion now feels like dependency. Same actions, different reception. The same text message that would have been received as thoughtful now registers as intrusive. The same gesture that would have felt romantic now feels performative. The same level of contact that was normal now feels excessive. Nothing about the behavior changed. Everything about how it's received changed. Men usually interpret this as unfairness, as moving goalposts, as punishment for doing what previously worked. It's not punishment, it's consequence. The consequence of trying to operate in a relational reality that no longer matches the internal one. By the time this becomes fully visible, The internal shift is often weeks or months old, maybe longer, which means that everything he's doing to fix it is being applied to a situation that's already reached a different stage than he realizes. He's trying to prevent something that already happened. And prevention isn't retroactive. There's another layer here that rarely gets discussed. The collapse point often creates a secondary effect where both people start performing a relationship that no longer exists emotionally. They go through motions, they maintain routines, they keep up appearances, sometimes to each other, sometimes just to themselves. This performance phase can last weeks, sometimes months, and during that time, men often believe things are stabilizing, that whatever was wrong is resolving, that normalcy is returning. It's not. What's actually happening is that the gap between internal reality and external behavior is widening, and the wider it gets, the more unsustainable it becomes. So, what's actually being communicated during this phase? Not fix this, not try harder, not even leave me alone. What's being communicated, quietly, non-verbally, through 1,000 small behavioral adjustments, is I've already moved on internally, and I'm waiting for the external situation to catch up. That's the collapse point, not when she says it's over, when she stops expecting it not to be. And once that expectation is gone, everything that follows is just procedural.